But let's go right now to Shields and Brooks. That's syndicated columnist Mark Shields, as you just saw, and New York Times columnist David Brooks. The only thing better than seeing you guys once is seeing you guys twice, three times.
Just a great treat.
So the healthcare story, David, the Senate Republicans have been trying so hard to once again resurrect an effort to repeal Obamacare. They thought they were getting, or at least they sounded like they were getting somewhere. But today, John McCain throws down the red flag, says he's not voting for it. Where does this leave all this?
It's, you know, it's pretty grim. Francisco Franco is still dead, to quote that old Saturday Night Live joke.
That's a good one.
I should say, first of all, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with having state flexibility and sending the healthcare thing back to the states. We're a diverse country. We might profit from different systems. And there's nothing wrong with reducing the rate of increase in the amount we spend on healthcare. We spend a lot more than other countries. Personally, I'd be happy if we spent a little less on healthcare and a little more on education. But the way the Republicans have done this, yet again, is without a deliberative process in a way that seems to have magically offended every single person outside the U.S. Capitol building, no matter what party, and in a way that raises anxiety on every single level. And so it's very easy for John McCain to say, you haven't followed regular order, you haven't worked with Democrats, you haven't held hearings, and so I'm going to be against this thing. And that's him being very consistent with where he's been over the past several months. And one would have to suspect that Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski will follow suit, and therefore it's down the tubes.
What does it look like to you?
I hate to say that I agree with David, but I agree with David. And I just add this. It's no accident, Judy, that the Republicans find themselves in this position. It's really since the retirement of John Chafee of Rhode Island in 1999, or David Durenberger from Minnesota in 1995, that there's been any Republican senator who has any earned credentials or any deserved reputation for working on health care. I mean, they've just been an against party. That's all. I mean, so who's the sponsor of this? Lindsey Graham. I happen to like Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham's credentials, military, national defense. He's worked bipartisan on global warming, campaign finance. Is there Lindsey Graham on health care? And Bill Cassidy, who got to the Senate a year ago. I mean, you know, not exactly a long-toothed, long-term legislator. I mean, all they have succeeded in doing this year is taking the Affordable Care Act, which had always been controversial and never had majority support, and now has majority support in the country. And they've convinced voters that Democrats care much more about health care than they do. And Democrats have an advantage. They believe in Medicare and Medicaid. They believe in federal action. There is no coherent Republican organizing principle or philosophy about health care. Everybody should have it, and it should be private. And I mean, it's an abstraction. It doesn't work in the real world, and voters have concluded it doesn't. And Pat Roberts, to his credit, the senior senator from Kansas, said this is not the best bill possible. It's the best possible bill. And this is the last stage out of Dodge. I mean, because of the quirky rules of the Senate, they need 50 votes until the 30th of September when the fiscal year ends. After that, it's 60. So they're trying to pass something, and they won't.
It's a tough moment for Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, they're caught with a divide. I do think there's a defensible case that an intelligent market-based system could reduce it, cause inefficiencies. There's some models around the world that Republicans and conservative policy wonks can get to point to that. But if you're going to get people to entertain the idea of some sort of reform, you have to give them universal coverage. We're at the point where even a lot of conservative healthcare economists think if we give them universal coverage, you get your pre-existing, you're going to have coverage. Then we can work on the reforms. But the Republican Party and the Republican Congressional Party is basically out of touch with their voters. Their voters are not libertarians. Their voters are insecure economically and want some security, and Medicaid and Medicare, and even now Obamacare offers some of them security. And they will not support their own Republican Party when it takes that away.
Well, while we're talking about Senate Republicans, President Trump, Mark, is headed to Alabama tonight to campaign for the man he endorsed in that runoff Senate election down there, Luther Strange. He's the appointed senator. What's made this race so interesting is the man he's running against is Roy Moore, the former state chief justice, who made a name for himself by trying to get the Ten Commandments publicly displayed in the state Capitol building. This is a race that probably otherwise wouldn't be getting a lot of attention, but Roy Moore is now ahead in the polls. And last night, I want to show everybody just a clip from the debate that Moore and Strange had last night, because Trump's name was front and center. Let's listen.
And I know you may get tired of hearing this, and you may resent that the president is my friend and is supporting me in this race, but I think it's a good thing that the president of the United States has a personal relationship with the junior senator from Alabama.
The problem is President Trump's being cut off in his office. He's being redirected by people like McConnell, who do not support his agenda, who will not support his agenda in the future.
And to suggest that the president of the United States, the head of the free world, a man who is changing the world, is being manipulated by Mitch McConnell is insulting to the president. That's why he's chosen me.
Mark, what does this tell us about the Republican, the state of play among Republicans in the Senate right now?
Well, first of all, Judy, let's understand this. Alabama, Donald Trump's 6th best state in public polling. He's the most popular there. A leading Republican campaign manager who's deeply involved in this race on behalf of Strange, or at least on the side supporting Luther Strange, told me that they will spend, they being Mitch McConnell's Senate Leadership Fund Political Action Committee, the Chamber of Commerce of the United States, and the National Rifle Association, over $12 million on behalf of Strange against Roy Moore. What it tells me is Luther Strange is presenting himself as Donald Trump's new best friend. And Roy Moore is running as, I am the real Trump candidate. I'm going to go to Washington and let Donald Trump be Donald Trump. He's trying to make it a referendum on Mitch McConnell, who this week in the Wall Street Journal NBC poll was at his all-time low, 11% favorable. And so I think that what Strange's side is counting on is Donald Trump, the president, going there to Alabama and convincing Trump voters who are more comfortable with Roy Moore to vote for Luther Strange.
And meanwhile, the president's poll numbers, David, have ticked up a few points in the last week or two.
Yeah, because he's done something with the Democrats, and bipartisanship is popular, so it's ticked up on there. But in Alabama, the revolution devours its own. You know, he ran as the anti-Washington candidate. Donald Trump did, got to Washington and has to play a little by some Washington rules, which is supporting the guys in the Senate who are supporting you. So he's supporting Strange. Roy Moore is a Trumpian before the letter, as they say, before Trump. And the guy who made his name on the Ten Commandments, on some gay marriage issues, it's Alabama. And so he is saying, I'm actually the Trumpian. And so I think what we see for the Republican Party is that this populist tide is not ebbing. If Moore wins, then there's some signs, Alabama's unique, Moore's unique, but there's some signs the party is still getting more populist. And that's caused by two things. First, as Mark said, McConnell is still the enemy for a lot of Republicans. The Washington Republican establishment is still the enemy more than ever. And the things that fueled the populist rise, the rise of the opiate crisis, the decimation of the economy, the white identity issues, all those things are still rising, not ebbing. And so the populism that Trump tapped into may be getting more extreme.
So turning quickly from populism to foreign policy, Mark, the president made his debut, first big speech before the United Nations General Assembly this week, and notable because he came out and said, basically, we will destroy North Korea if they make a wrong move. Does he come away looking more like a statesman? He's followed that with days of squabbling, in effect, with Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. How do we now look upon President Trump as somebody who's leading foreign policy?
An embarrassment. I mean, you compare the words of presidents in the past, measured, you know, John Kennedy in Berlin, you know, wherever free men live, they come to Berlin, they are citizens of Berlin. Ich bin ein Berliner, Ronald Reagan, Mr. Gorbachev, you know, open this gate, tear down this wall. I mean, they were expressing principle. They were expressing it coherently and lucidly and compellingly, and there was a sense of pride and national direction. That was totally missing. I gave him a B for bombast and bullying and belligerence. I mean, that was a you know, it was not a speech in which Americans could take pride or direction or comfort.
Yeah, I don't mind a little tough talk. I mean, when Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire, he was telling the truth. So, and that's fine. The problem with Donald Trump's, with the rhetoric there, is that it's self-destructive. First of all, it may put the North Koreans in a corner where they can't back down because of their own psychic needs. And it creates a context in which North Korea can test whatever they want to do, apparently, in the atmosphere. And then weirdly, against North Korea, suddenly we look like the bad guys. And that's the interesting thing about this. The speech was so nationalistic.
Yeah.
If you're the country who's the top dog in the world, which we are, you need international organizations and alliances as a way to extend your power. And if you take that away, you're diminishing your own self. And so his nationalistic pose makes sense if you're Vladimir Putin, if you're a second-rate power. But if you're a top-rate power, it's a self-destructive thing. And we see it here where we actually end up having less leverage rather than more.
So, Mark, what do we look for in the weeks to come? Because right now it's just a war. It is literally a war of words. I mean, a lot of people are out there listening to this, thinking, "Are we going to go to war?"
You know, I certainly pray not. I hope not. I take some comfort, quite frankly, as a citizen, in your interview with Tim Kaine, the senator from Virginia, who said that he, who had not hesitated to criticize President Trump's policies, had great confidence in the defense team of Chief of Staff, General Chief. I'm sorry. Of Secretary Mattis, General Mattis,
right,
and General McMaster, and General Joe Dunford, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, they provide him what confidence and direction and maturity, and that's our best hope.
So he's surrounded by people who are getting some high marks. Some of them, David.
He's got very good people, but I've been watching the Vietnam series on PBS. And countries can do really stupid things. And the veneer of civilization sometimes gets slender. World War I, there were a lot of very talented diplomats and world leaders at that time, but events just spun out of control. So I don't think we're going to go to war. I still think there's some reason on both sides. But you look at the realm of history, and you have a little cause for concern.
Yeah. And watching the Vietnam series, which is a superb series for any of us who haven't started to watch, you can do that. All right, David Brooks, Mark Shields, thank you both.
Thank you, Judy.